Of his actual talk. It's Elastin Regeneration, restoring the elastic life to extend a healthy lifespan, but he also has retreats in Holland. We are chatting backstage. He does some really interesting stuff, and I'm so excited to hear what he has to share with you guys. Matthias Breugelmans, everybody.
Thank you for a very nice introduction and some, it's an amazing shirt, right? It's difficult to live up to something like that. Very nice to meet you all. My name is Matthias Breugelmans, that's how you pronounce it correctly. I'm the CEO of Elastrin Therapeutics. You can see the lovely city center of Greenville in South Carolina, where we have our headquarters on the picture. And as mentioned, together with a very good friend of mine, which you can see here in the front, Greg, we started a psychedelic retreat center in Holland last year, where we offer psychedelic retreats 3 days to entrepreneurs and business leaders. It's, let's say, this is the project that pays the bill, and the other project is my own interest and my own heart. So talking a little bit about longevity, I know this is the first time that in this setting that we actually talk about longevity, so I stole a couple of slides from someone who presented earlier today, Phil Newman. You might have seen him. He talked about the investment space, so how many billions go in which directions. I think it's a little bit important to explain what we actually mean with longevity, or at least what I mean with longevity. Today we live until we're 80, maybe some even to 90 and above, but the time that we're in good health typically ends around 65. 60 to 65, then the first typically cardiovascular diseases. Obesity, of course, here in the US is a huge issue, rising like hell now in South America and in Asia as well. So what we try to do in the longevity space is really extend the time that you're healthy as long as possible. I know that there's always a little bit of confusion when we talk about longevity. It's not to live 150 years old. I think in the end, yes, we will all very soon live to 150 years old and even much longer. But you don't want to be miserable 100 years of the 150 years old, right? I think that's also where mental health kicks in, and I like the combination of psychedelics and longevity, because for me they go hand in hand. Without mental health, without purpose in life, without also being connected socially, I don't think you all want to live until you're 150 years old. So when we talk about longevity, it's of course in the field where I'm working, in the biotech field, it's about diseases. And these are the diseases, and let's say also a little bit the numbers which it costs to society on a yearly basis. As you can see, cardiovascular disease is very high up. It's in the green color, and in the red color, very much linked to it is obesity. Altogether, these are, of course, trillions of dollars that we spend on healthcare, on trying to solve these diseases. But luckily, with Ozempic and now Zepbound, which has just been launched or approved by the FDA yesterday, even more weight loss is possible. I think we can probably, within the next 5 to 10 years, completely eradicate obesity. For the moment, you can't get it, but that's just manufacturing. Give it a year, and then we'll all be able to shoot up as much Ozempic and Zepbound as we like. And I do believe that this is a longevity drug, because most diseases actually originate from overweight, and diseases linked to overweight. If you're overweight, you don't do sports because you're overweight. I lost about 50 pounds this year, and without Ozempic, sadly, I couldn't get it, but I would if I could. But it's very difficult. If you're so far away from your healthy weight, even losing 10 or 20 pounds, which is a lot, doesn't get you halfway. So I do believe in the power of a weight loss drug, if it is combined, of course, with more, with sports, with activity, but I think the one is really linked to the other. So if we talk about aging, and this is where it starts to become a little bit more scientific, we try to really group what is aging into certain buckets. And it's not easy. Scientists have tried this for the last 20 years. Aging is very complex. Everything talks to each other. If you have cardiovascular disease, it's typically because you're a little bit pre-diabetic. And where is the pre-diabetic coming from? Is it genetic or is it lifestyle? So it's very difficult. This is a very first, or let's say a second attempt into the hallmarks of aging, which, let's say, processes in your body drives you to actually age. It is quite strange in the end, right? We have cells, and at one point they just stop working. It doesn't seem to be really predetermined why. I mean, if you have a computer, you know when it stops working, you shut it off and you turn it on. Cells are a little bit more complex, and I think that's the human body is a complex system. Every cell is different, every person is different to each other, so we won't crack the puzzle in the next couple of years, but in the next 20 years, I do believe that we'll talk about, let's say, aging like we talk now about diabetes, almost almost solved in a way. So again, and this is the last slide that I stole from Phil, aging really has a broad span of applications that we can use. One that I think is quite cool are the two little vampire blood or the vampire fangs that you can see here. It's actually young blood. What's happening in some lower income countries like in Africa is that people get transfusions from younger people because some people believe that young people have a certain factor in the blood that makes you young. So old rich people go to Africa, get young people's blood, and then hope that they will live a bit longer. That's one of the more shady ones. As mentioned, I will talk about a real application, which is tissue regeneration. And what is regeneration? Again, as mentioned, it's quite strange that a heart works perfectly for 80 years and then all of a sudden it stops. This muscle contracts 60, 70 times a minute, 24/7, but all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it stops working. So in tissue regeneration, what we actually try to do is really boost the body's own ability to regenerate itself. It's very difficult to bring, for example, new tissue in. Typically, the body solves itself, and that is by replacing older tissue with new tissue or just, boosting the body to get that new tissue generated. And if we talk a little bit about financial aspects of tissue regeneration, it's a big market, but it's still quite small. $3.5 billion seems a lot, but it's actually peanuts when you compare it to what, for example, Ozempic can make. It's predicted to make $200 billion a year in the next 5 years per year, so that's a trillion. So $3.5 billion is not a lot. I will talk today about Elastrin, which is on the far right side. As you can see, some other companies have raised quite a lot of money. We're still a little bit behind. The numbers are not accurate anymore. We got some more millions into the company recently, which we put to good use to develop the technology. That was my introduction. I would like to now, of course, spend a lot of words or a lot of time on the tissue that we work on at Elastrin Therapeutics, which is called Elastin. As you have probably figured out in the meantime, it's just an extra R in our name to make it a little bit more pronounceable. And why do we work on Elastin, and what is Elastin? So in a nutshell, all of us in the end will die mostly, or most of us will die from a heart attack or from a cardiovascular disease. Luckily not now, but when you're 70 up to your 90s, and that all has its roots into the elastic tissue in your heart that starts to degrade. And what we've developed is a nanotechnology, so a very small particle that has a drug inside and that we deliver specifically to the sites of disease. But if we talk about elastin, it's important to understand what it is. Most people know collagen, of course, from the fillers. If you are in the cosmetic field, collagen is strength. It provides, let's say, structure in the body. Elastin provides the elasticity. And how do I typically explain it? We all have arteries, we all have lungs, but without elasticity, they cannot contract and expand. And without that pumping motion, you can't get blood around in your body. So that's how it works. It works a little bit like tights. If you wear tights on sports, we went to the gym this morning, you see people wearing active wear. It's exactly to do the same thing, to kind of give the body a little bit of tension, and with that tension you can pump around blood and oxygen. The problem when you talk about elastin, and this is not the case with collagen, of course we use fillers in the skin, but in the rest of your body, your joints, your hips, collagen gets actually replaced quite easily and quite effectively, even until we're quite old. Elastin, it's not the case. So when you're young, until you're 6 years old, you produce new elastin, Afterwards, it's over. So what you produce until you're 6, 7 years old is typically what you need to last with for the rest of your life. And then typically, because elastin is a very stable molecule, you can't break it down, but we have, of course, we don't live in a sacred environment where everything is safe. We have radiation, pollution, heavy metals, and all of these factors that they break down the elastin. And you can see it quite nicely on this picture, of course, hugely magnified. On the left side, you see the healthy elastin, which looks like a rubber band, and on the right side, you see it when it's damaged. And it's really where it gets damaged that an inflammation starts. And as we all know, inflammation is never a good thing. It's what makes most things in our body go and break down. And that leads then to the chronic diseases. So in the end, you could say, well, if it's a disease of aging, what can we do? Radiation is everywhere, especially it's just baseline radiation from the environment. Pollution, you cannot not eat, of course. So you need to consume food, and in food there's high amounts of heavy metals. So we at Elastrin said, okay, if we cannot change those things, let's make some new drugs that can reverse the damage. And what this drug looks like, this is just one of many billions of small particles that we use. And apologies if it's very scientific, I'll try to make it as light as possible. Typically, we show this at a biotech conference, and then people complain that it's not detailed enough. But as you can see, the orange bubble is a nanoparticle. Why you call it nanoparticle? Because it's very small. It's 100 times smaller than a red blood cell, so it really goes everywhere into the body once you inject it. And then you put it into a safe nanoparticle, which gets degraded. Of course, you don't want to die from the therapy or be worse off. And then on that surface, we have a targeting mechanism. And I don't know if you're aware what antibodies do. Antibodies typically bind to things in your body, to tissues in your body. And for us, it binds to damaged elastin. And then the combination of having like a little ball that has drugs inside, and that then gets targets to the tissue, that is the effective therapy. We also recently have developed a messenger RNA. Messenger RNA, as you are all familiar with after the COVID vaccine part, is a very effective way to make a lot of proteins in your body. That's how the vaccine works as well. And we've developed our own messenger RNA that produces a lot of new elastin, and this is also now part of our development. So if we talk about elastin regeneration, it again starts with the degradation of it, and you cannot stop it. So that's what you can see here on this slide. You go from healthy elastin, it gets degraded, starts leading to chronic cardiovascular disease. Everyone in the room now, of course, I mean, even the young people have degraded elastin, but it's a progressive disease, so it gets worse the more inflammation you get when you grow older. And what we try to do is really reverse that process. Go back to a stage where you had actually healthy arteries and healthy lungs. And what we do believe is that at one point in time, if you can take it from a younger age, you won't even develop these chronic diseases anymore. So that's what we try to do. We try to bring it to the market for a number of diseases, and then someone just fell over at the end of the presentation. Sorry. And then let's hope that if everybody can take it from a young time on, then you actually could live until you're 400 or 500 years old, if the rest of the body keeps working as well. So I brought some data. It's still a scientific presentation, a scientific company, where you can see on the left side of, with the blue arrows, the calcification in the arteries. This is a animal model study. Of course, you always need to use animals because it's difficult to test on humans if you're in those early stages, where you can see that the therapy completely reverses the calcification in the tissue. And that's very important because in the end, if your arteries get clogged up, it's also typically very difficult to reverse that process. So that's really some groundbreaking results. This was the first time in the world that that was being showed, and the same for aneurysms. I don't know, I think most of you know someone who died too young of an aneurysm. It's typically what kills us quite suddenly, a brain aneurysm or a abdominal aneurysm. It's where you lose elasticity in a large artery, and if you lose the elasticity, remember about the tights. If you take off your tights, your body will expand as well a little bit. The same with arteries, it starts to balloon, and when the balloon gets too big, it bursts. And that's what you can see on the right side. You see a large, let's say, dark area. That's the ballooning of the artery, and with our therapy, you completely reverse it. Again, this is the first time that that was shown, and of course, very important for patients who are dying typically way too young of these types of diseases. So from a timeline point of view, we're still a quite early stage company. We're starting our first clinical trial next year with our first compound. We've got about 3 compounds in development. We hope to be on the market in 2027 and are already treating first patients in 2025. We go for orphan diseases. Orphan diseases are diseases that are not very common but have no therapy. Quite devastating, typically also in young children. One of the diseases that we target is called GACI or GACI in the States. It's a disease where 6-month-old babies have arteries of 80-year-olds, and of course, they typically also, 80% of them die within the first year of life. So we try to bring this therapy to these patients as quickly as possible. Of course, the therapy has quite some other, let's say, disease that we can focus, but we're not going to do it ourselves. We're here, of course, also to look for a little bit of money. As you all know, it's not an easy time for startups to raise capital. It's very difficult to get to the funds. The biotech investment has almost completely shut down this year. So as mentioned, we are raising a very small round right now. It's actually kind of completed. It was 5 million that we were looking for. Typically, if you talk about clinical trials, you spend anywhere between 10 to 50 million per clinical trial, so it's quite cash intensive. But that will help us actually to bring a first therapy to the market in 2025, and then as of 27, we can use it for the broader population. When I talk about we, I talk, of course, about the people who do the work. I'm, let's say, making sure that there's money into the company, but I'm not the scientist or the brains behind this entire development. That's been Professor Vaivahari, who you can see, and Dr. Sonja Golombek, who is our very bright new young scientist who has developed the messenger RNA. And then we have some, let's say, older gentlemen who help us with fundraising, who help us with the clinical development. And when we talk about age, we also have an advisory board who is typically of, let's say, people who have a long career who can really help you to develop your technology. So we're very happy to have these people all on board. And that leads me to the end of the presentation for today. So why is elastin important? I hope you just take as one take-home message. It is a protein in your body that provides elasticity and that allows you to pump blood and oxygen, and it degrades when we get older. Our therapy reverses that process, and again, if you think about medicine, as they call it today, medicine 2.0, it is all about treating symptoms mainly. If you have a headache, you take a painkiller, but you don't really solve why you have a headache in the first place. I think this goes really into that direction, solving or preventing a disease from actually occurring in the first place. There's a huge unmet need. There's at least 1 billion people that have diseases linked to damaged elastin. The main cause of that is still cardiovascular disease, although with Ozempic, I assume that will go down steadily over the next years. Very nice team. I'm actually very lucky to have these people working in our labs and driving the development of these products. And we work on orphan diseases. I think that's a personal mission for myself to try and solve these very deadly diseases for young patients. And as mentioned, we're always out of money. In a way, even if we get 5 million in, it's going to be gone by the time I do my next presentation. So always looking for money, always looking for partnerships in this field. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And of course, if there's any question, then I'm happy to take it. Go ahead. Yeah, so the question was about mutations. The targeting that we do is really looking for the damaged elastin. And do we see any issues with where you can't bind anymore? The thing is, we've developed the antibody ourselves as well, and it binds only to a very small part of the damaged elastin, which is always exposed. You need to look at elastin a little bit like a pen, like where you write with. You have like the core that does the magic in the middle, and then a plastic layer, a cover around it. And it's when this cover gets broken that the body sees it, and it thinks this is not normal. This is foreign material, this is a pathogen that tries to make me sick. And to solve it, it just puts layers of calcium on top of it. But you know, calcium is what makes our bones strong, so you don't want to have an artery, which needs to be flexible and contract, look like a bone. So we have a very small part only which we bind, and we've seen it in all animals. It's preserved. You can give these therapies to dogs, to cats, to horses. It will always work. Thank you for the question. Yes, please, Anna. Well, it's a very good question. We haven't been able to test it yet. We're going to start our first clinical trial next year. Now you need to, let's say, bank a little bit on the trust that these are all, let's say, different parts put together of something which is already shown to be safe. We've used antibodies for all cancers in the meantime for 20 years. We use nanoparticles. The vaccine, for example, was a nanoparticle. I think all of us in the room have survived at least 4 of those jabs, so safety profile is extremely well tolerated. So we don't expect any safety concerns moving forward. But of course, even when we talk about Ozempic, right? Ozempic has a certain safety risk. Let's not kid ourselves. In 20 years, most likely we will see the first people dying from side effects of Ozempic. But you need to look at it from the bigger picture, right? I mean, obesity, for example, but also cardiovascular disease will kill most of us anyway. And it's a risk balance that you need to strike with a therapy. And if you have a cancer, of course, if you're going to die from a cancer in 2 weeks, the therapy can be quite toxic. For something where you will die from in 20 years, we need to have a very good safety profile. Yeah, please. Yeah, it's a good question. I think for the moment we see a little bit the patient journey like someone who has cancer, but then let's say, of course, without all the side effects. As a patient, you would come into the clinic, just a day clinic, and you would get an IV. So you would get a catheter and then an IV for about 10 minutes, stay for, let's say, half an hour to make sure that there's no side effects, and repeat that within 2 weeks. It really depends how much damage you have, right? That's really the story. I think if you would come in as a preventive therapy, 1 jab for 5 years would probably be enough. If you have an 80-year-old who has severe calcification, severe elastin damage everywhere in his body, from the skin to the lungs to the arteries, then he or she would need to come in much more often, right? So it really depends on the amount of damage that you gained over time. Please. Yeah, no, elastin is everywhere. It goes from, I mean, for men it is in your penis, because else you cannot get an erection. In skin it is there for elasticity. That's why you get wrinkles when you grow older. So part of the technology is also used in a cosmetic line. We don't do it, it's a sister company. And your lungs. Excuse me? Absolutely, yeah, joints. So people actually have a joint injury, and for example, sport athletes, it's always the elastin that breaks down. It's in your knee, in your tendons, and so on. So it's everywhere where you need elasticity, you will find it. Infection is definitely one of the issues where it starts to degrade. So, for example, COVID, the virus never killed anyone, right? You actually died because of an inflammation that you got on the lungs. So what happened is that the virus, it broke down the elastin in the lungs, and then the body tries to solve it. So the body tries to solve it by putting more liquid in it. So just trying to like dilute the virus out. But because of it, you get water on your lungs, and if you were a little overweight, that's where you would die from. So even most pathogens don't directly kill you. It's always a reaction of the body. Typically, inflammation kills you in the end. So your own body going in overdrive. Same with cancer. It's your own cells who actually kill you in the end. Sorry. The fascial system. Sorry, I don't know the word. I'm not a native. Indeed, yeah. You will find it in your nerve system as well, everywhere. You see it even on your brain-blood barrier. You will have a lot of elastin that provides that elasticity, so it can actually expand when you have more liquid in your spine than when you have less, right?
Any kind of like hydrophilic organ or surface.
Yeah. Absolutely, but it's really where it is damaged that it causes a disease, right? So in the end, you do want to just save a patient, or you do want to solve a disease. And you want to leave healthy tissue alone and just target damaged tissue in the end. Anything else? Very good. Then I would like to thank you for your attention and for the many questions. If there's anything, we'll be here for a couple of days, so come and find us.
Hey, Matthias Breugelmans, everybody!